Hello everyone. This is a vector illustration that I did just for myself. It was a personal piece, and you'll see that I brought in line art that was already done. I did that line art in Affinity Designer. I was testing out the program, but unfortunately it kept crashing on my computer, so I did have to switch back over to my tried and true Adobe Illustrator, and then went to using the blob brush to kind of put in some hatching for shadows. And you'll see that that's what I'm doing right now. And the way that I usually tend to work is very sloppy at the beginning of an illustration, because if I try to edit myself as I'm working or try to get every stroke perfect as I'm laying it down, I end up kind of frozen or paralyzed and I don't get anything done. So I tend to work really sloppy to begin with and then just kind of go back and edit later to kind of clean things up. You'll see that a lot more here when I start laying down color. So I had the general idea of what I wanted to do for this illustration, just a deer with some foliage in sort of a marker style, and then I just sort of free-handed it from the idea. This wasn't for any particular reason, so it was just kind of playing with different styles and techniques. And I do usually like the uneven, kind of chunky line art. I just like the texture and the character that uneven lines gives you. It looks and feels a little bit more like an ink drawing with, let's say, like a leaky pen or something like that. And now I have a particular type of foliage that I want to have in the background, but sometimes it's easier to draw off to the side of the image that you're making and then kind of put that drawing where you want it. That's one of the best things about being able to work digitally, is you don't have to place everything exactly where it's going to live in the final illustration. You can kind of work off to the side and then move it over. You'll see now I've got a lot of overlapping lines and things are looking a little bit chaotic, so I'm going to go back through, use the eraser and kind of clean things up, decide what I want to live on top of what to kind of create a little bit of depth within the image. Okay, and now I'm going to start putting in color. Start with a super generic background, just to give it a little bit of something to build off of. And once I've done with that, now you'll start to see what I was talking about with things being very messy at the beginning. I barely even follow the actual line art when I'm putting in color. And I do alternate a lot between the brush and the blob brush. Those are probably my two favorite tools within Illustrator. I do also use layer styles a lot in Illustrator, so you'll see that I'm kind of playing with different options, and I end up going with the hue. And what I'm doing is bringing in a little bit of color from the background and just barely placing it within the deer it's kind of a quick and easy trick to keep a little bit of color harmony within the image, so that the deer doesn't look like it's just pasted on top of the background. It looks like it's actually a part of the entire picture. I'll do that more throughout the image as well. So there's other colors that I use in the flowers, and I will also bring those colors into the deer. Again, what I knew I really wanted to do with this image was kind of a marker style, so you'll see a lot of that kind of mimic going on. And when I say marker style, I do mean a little bit more of a messy style as well. Marker can go you can have very smooth marker lines that don't even look like marker, but I was going for a very illustrative or graphic version. And a quick trick for doing that is I am using the same color for the shadow of the rose as I used for just the base color of the rose, but just setting it to either multiply or color burn. So that creates really quick shadows that are within the same color family and makes it look cohesive. And I do want the foliage to be different shades of green, so the green kind of varies, but I don't want too many colors going on in this image, so I will mess around with opacity a little bit to kind of change things up, and again kind of create a sense of depth within the image, so it looks like some leaves are a little bit further away or behind the main subject of the picture. And one more time, you'll see that the color that I used in the purple of the flowers, I used in the deer. And now I'm going to kind of go through and make sure I got my green leaves. It's kind of hard to see because, like I said, I used the same color for the green to create the shadows, but once I set it to multiply or color burn, then you can kind of see how I set up the shadows. And I do that throughout the image, so on all the flowers, all the leaves. Now I'm going to kind of do some highlights. I don't usually use all white in my images or like a pure white, because I don't think that it looks very natural. It tends to be a little bit harsh, but if you are able to kind of play with it, lower the opacity like I'm doing here, sometimes you can change the blending mode, then it won't be a pure white, it will just look like it's a little bit of, if you were drawing on paper, it's like the paper showing through. Okay, so now you'll see that I'm finally starting to kind of clean up the color overlay. Some illustration styles actually purposefully have color that's outside of the lines, the line art, and that's kind of a cool effect, but it's not exactly what I'm going for with this image, so I am going to clean it up so that the color rests within the actual borders of the line art. This isn't necessarily the most efficient way of working, to be honest. It's probably more work, but like I said, if I tried to make every stroke perfect as I'm laying it down, then I end up like not getting anything done. It slows me down in the long run doing it that way, so doing this, editing myself after I've laid down all the colors, works a lot better for me. It also allows me to make decisions about not erasing some of the colors. Like you'll see this yellow that's laying on the leaf, that's from the rose, and I'm choosing not to erase that because I like the blend that it makes. Again, I'm going for a marker style, and it's kind of like the color bleeds in a little bit, so it adds a more cohesive feel to the image as well. Okay, now I feel pretty good about how that is. So I'm going to add a little bit more shadows to the deer. I do want the deer to be a little bit more pronounced than anything else around it. So right now I'm playing around with different ideas for marker-like strokes, and I'm going to add a little bit more detail in terms of shadow and highlights to the deer, so it kind of is the focus of attention. Sometimes the easiest way to do it is just draw the shape that you want and then fill it in, again using the blob brush. And I like the overlay that's happening, like the strokes are overlaying each other. You get these slightly darker lines from that effect, and I like that. That might be something that somebody doesn't like, which of course means that they would want to do this in a different way, but it's exactly the style that I'm going for. Okay, so now what I'm actually doing is putting these diagonal lines of color throughout the entire deer to kind of give that like marker effect, and I'm going in all different directions to kind of unify and blend out, because I do like the effect, but I don't want it to be quite so harsh. So now you'll see that it's all kind of like blended together. And when you're using the blob brush, if you want it to not create one big shape when you're going color over color, then you have to go into the settings of the brush and click merge only with selected, and then make sure that the keep selected is not selected. Alright, so now I am actually doing shadows for the antlers, and sometimes it's easier to turn the base shape off so you can see what you're actually doing. And finally, I love to do the little detailing of the eyes, give them a little bit of shine, make them look a little bit more round. I do the same thing with the nose, especially since the nose right now is just a black spot on the deer's face. I'm going to give it a little bit more dimension. Add a little bit of shine to the nostril area so that you can tell there are nostrils. But I do want it to be very subtle, so very small and very light. There we go. And now these are the final highlights of the image. This is if I had like a white gel pen and I was working in marker, this is what I would do towards the end of the piece. Now I'm just deciding to make a little bit more shine on the antlers, even though it's really hard to tell that it's even there. And I wasn't going to originally put any shine on the flowers, but I like the roses at the front to have a little bit more pop to them, so I am going to add some shine or some highlights there. And I am using a pen tablet. That's how my brush is able to pick up on different pressure, so the stroke weight changes as I apply more or less pressure. Now I am just going to add my signature, which of course was pre-made. Again, this entire image took me about 2 hours to complete.